Close your eyes and let the world around you fade. The sounds of traffic, the glow of your screen, the noise of the day all begin to melt away. You are not here anymore. You are somewhere far away, in another time, another world. The year is long ago, so far that the dates blur together. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth, and the night is lit only by the glow of a single candle flickering beside your bed of straw. Outside, a rooster stirs, waiting for dawn, and in the distance, a dog barks once before falling silent again. The world is quiet. The world is still. You are lying on a pallet stuffed with dry straw and rustling leaves. It is not soft, but it holds the faint warmth of your own body, a small pocket of comfort in the cool pre-dawn air. Above you, the heavy, dark beams of the cottage ceiling are lost in shadow, their ancient wood groaning softly with the shifting weight of the thatched roof. The thatch itself, a thick blanket of reeds and straw, whispers as the night breeze passes over it, a sound like a long, slow exhalation. This is the sound of shelter. This is the sound of home. The darkness is not absolute. A single tallow candle, its wick sputtering in a small pool of rendered animal fat, casts a weak, flickering golden light. It illuminates the rough, uneven texture of the wattle and daub walls, a mixture of woven branches and mud that has been patched and repaired over countless seasons. The light catches on the rim of a wooden bucket, on the curve of an earthenware pot, on the still, sleeping face of a family member nearby. Their breathing is a soft, rhythmic presence in the room, a gentle tide of life rising and falling in the deep well of the night. The air itself is thick with the smells of this life, the lingering aroma of stew from the evening meal, the sharp tang of wood smoke that has settled deep into the fabric of everything, the earthy scent of the floor beneath you, and the faint animal warmth of the livestock that sleeps just beyond a thin wooden partition, their own slow breaths mingling with yours. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a change begins in the quality of the darkness. At the edges of the single, shuttered window, a faint gray luminescence begins to seep in. It is not yet light, but a dilution of the night, a promise of the dawn that is still a long way off. This is the hour before the birds begin to sing, the hour before the world truly stirs. It is a time of profound and ancient stillness. It is into such a world, in the year 1028, that a boy is born. He is not born in a simple cottage like this one, but his world is made of the same fundamental materials: stone, wood, earth, and sky. He is born in the town of Falaise, in the Duchy of Normandy, within the cold, formidable walls of a stone castle. His father is the Duke himself, Robert I, a man of immense power and restless energy. His mother, Herleva, is not a duchess, but the daughter of a local tanner, a man who worked with animal hides. From his first breath, the boy carries a stain upon his name, a label that will follow him through all the years of his youth. He is William, the bastard. His earliest memories are not of titles or politics, but of sensations. The feeling of the immense, cold stones of the castle walls, damp to the touch even in summer. The way the light from a high, arrow-slit window slices through the gloom of a long corridor, illuminating a billion dancing dust motes in its beam. The echoing sound of his own small footsteps on the stone floors of the great hall, a cavernous space that smells of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the sweet, musty scent of old wine spilled on the flagstones. He remembers the scratchy feel of a wool tunic against his skin and the heavy warmth of a wolfhound leaning against his legs, its coarse fur a comforting presence. His childhood is a strange duality. He is the son of the most powerful man in the land, and yet he is not fully one of them. He is taught the things a nobleman's son must learn, but there is always a shadow at the edge of his vision. He learns to ride a horse almost as soon as he can walk. His day is spent in the castle yard with a groom and a steady, patient pony.
He feels the rhythmic rocking gait of the animal, the creak of the leather saddle, the pull of the reins in his small hands. Hour after hour, he circles the yard, learning balance, learning control, the repetitive motion becoming a part of him. He is given a wooden sword and taught by a grim-faced man-at-arms. The sword is surprisingly heavy. His lessons are not exciting duels, but a slow, monotonous grind of practice. Stance, block, parry, strike. Over and over, his small arm aching with the effort, he strikes a wooden post wrapped in leather. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound is dull, repetitive, echoing in the courtyard. He is not learning to fight a glorious battle. He is learning the discipline of repetition, the slow building of strength through endless boring practice. Inside the castle keep, in a small cold chamber, a priest teaches him his letters. The air is still and smells of old parchment and beeswax. Outside, the world is alive with sound, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the shouts of men, the barking of dogs, but in here, there is only the scratchy whisper of a quill on a sheet of vellum, and the droning, monotonous voice of his tutor reciting Latin conjugations or the long, tangled genealogies of the Norman dukes. He learns that power is not only in the arm that wields a sword, but in the words on a page, in the claims made and recorded, in the slow, patient weaving of a legal right. In 1035, everything changes. William is only a boy of 7 or 8 years old when his father, Duke Robert, is overcome with a desire to make a pilgrimage to the holy city of Jerusalem. It is a long and perilous journey, one from which many never return. Before he leaves, the Duke summons all the powerful, quarrelsome barons of Normandy to his court. We can imagine the scene in the great hall. It is crowded and noisy, filled with these hard, bearded men in their leather and wool. The air is thick with the smell of wine and suspicion. Duke Robert stands before them, his young son William at his side. He makes them swear a solemn oath, one by one. They must recognize this boy, his illegitimate son, as the rightful heir to the duchy. Imagine the long, tedious ceremony. Each baron, in turn, steps forward. He kneels on the hard stone floor. He places his hands on a chest containing the holiest of relics, perhaps the finger bone of a saint or a splinter from a martyr's cross. His voice, low and gravelly, drones through the hall as he recites the long, formal words of the oath, swearing his fealty, his loyalty, to the small, silent boy standing beside the Duke. The process takes hours. For William, it must be a confusing, overwhelming blur of solemn faces, unfamiliar words, and the heavy, oppressive weight of the moment.
Then his father is gone. The Duke rides away with his retinue, and a strange quiet settles over the castle. Weeks turn into months. The seasons change. And then the news, traveling slowly, like a ripple in a vast pond, finally reaches Normandy. Duke Robert is dead. He will not be coming home. And with that news, the world of the boy Duke shatters. The sacred oaths sworn over the bones of saints prove to be as fragile as glass. The years that follow are not a time of grand battles, but of a slow, creeping, and terrifying chaos. This period will be known as the Anarchy, and for the child William, it is a lesson in survival. His life becomes a series of sudden alarms and hushed departures in the dead of night. His guardians, the men sworn to protect him, are murdered, one after another. One is killed by rivals in the very bedchamber where William sleeps. Imagine the boy, jolted from sleep not by a great clash of steel, but by a choked gasp, a sudden heavy fall, and the coppery, metallic smell of blood filling the dark, cold air. He is hurried away by a loyal servant, wrapped in a blanket, his small feet bare on the freezing stone, whisked away to another castle, another safe house. His life is no longer about lessons. It is about listening.
listening for the creak of a floorboard that doesn't belong, listening for the murmur of unfamiliar voices behind a closed door, listening to the sound of horses' hooves in the courtyard in the middle of the night, and the sickening, uncertain pause as he waits to find out if they bring friend or foe. He learns the geography of fear. He spends time in hiding, living in the humble cottages of peasants, a world away from the cold grandeur of his castles. Here he experiences the life we first imagined. He sleeps on a straw pallet. He smells the earthy scent of a dirt floor and the sweet, comforting aroma of bread baking in a clay oven. He eats pottage, a thick, simple stew of boiled grains and whatever vegetables are available, served in a wooden bowl. He learns the deep, profound quiet of the countryside, a quiet punctuated only by the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, and the sigh of the wind through the trees. He sees the endless, repetitive cycle of labor that governs the lives of his people, the plowing, the sowing, the weeding, the reaping. He learns that for most of the world, life is not about power and titles, but about the slow, patient struggle for survival. These years of fear and hiding forge the boy into a man. He learns to be watchful, to be silent, to trust his own judgment above all others. He learns patience not as a virtue, but as a tool for survival. The chaos of the anarchy is not a roaring fire. It is a slow, grinding erosion of order, a constant low-level hum of danger that becomes the new sound of silence. As he grows into a tall, strong teenager, he begins to fight back. He begins the long, slow process of reclaiming his stolen duchy. His first battles are not the stuff of legend. They are small, messy, brutal skirmishes fought in the muddy fields and dense forests of Normandy against his own rebellious kinsmen. He learns the grim reality of combat, the bone-deep weariness, the biting cold of a night watch, the mud that cakes his boots and clothes, and the slow, agonizing crawl of time as you wait for an enemy to make a move. He learns the crushing weight of a coat of chainmail, and the simple, profound relief of taking it off at the end of a long day. Slowly, methodically, with a patience born of his long years of waiting, he begins to impose his will. He pits one rival baron against another. He masters the art of the siege, a slow, tedious business of surrounding a castle and starving its defenders into submission. This is not glorious work. It means weeks, sometimes months, of sitting in a muddy, cold camp, watching the unchanging stone walls of the enemy fortress. It means dealing with the daily, monotonous problems of supply, of discipline, of boredom among his own men. And so, the boy who was born a bastard, the child who survived the years of chaos, forges himself into a ruler. He hammers his authority into shape with slow, deliberate, and relentless blows. His youth is over, but it has left its indelible mark. He is disciplined, cautious, and possessed of a deep, unshakable belief in his own destiny, a destiny that he is beginning to feel may stretch far beyond the rolling green hills and damp, fertile fields of Normandy. The loom of his youth, with its threads of fear, patience, and survival, has woven a complex and formidable man. And now, this man begins to turn his eyes northward, across the gray, churning waters of the sea, to a land called England. But that is a story for another time. For now, the night is deep. The candle has burned low, its flame a tiny sleepy star in the darkness. The world is at rest, gathering its strength for the slow, inevitable dawn. And you too can rest, sinking into the deep, quiet stillness of a world long past.
Part 2. The Forge of Ambition. The long, chaotic years of William's youth recede, like a fever that is finally broken, leaving behind a profound sense of weary calm. The Duchy of Normandy settles, not into a placid peace, but into a state of order, held firm by the steady, powerful grip of its young duke. The forge where his ambition is shaped is not a place of flashing sparks and roaring flames. It is a place of slow, deliberate heat, of patient, rhythmic work, where plans are tempered over years and power is shaped with careful, repeated blows of the hammer. Let us settle into the daily rhythm of William's court at Rouen. It is not, as songs and stories might have you believe, a place of constant feasting and high adventure. It is, for the most part, a center of administration, a slow-moving engine of governance. Imagine a vast stone hall, its high timbered ceiling obscured by the smoke from the central hearth that never seems to fully escape through the louvers in the roof. The air is always cool, carrying a permanent scent of damp stone, beeswax from candles, and the faint papery smell of old documents. Pale light filters through high, narrow windows, illuminating the ever-present dust that swirls in its beams. The dominant sound here is not the clash of swords or the music of lutes. It is a low, monotonous hum of activity. The murmur of voices speaking in the clipped, direct tones of Norman French. The rustle of woolen cloaks and leather boots scuffing on the stone floor. And, most persistently, the faint, dry scratch of a scribe's quill moving across a sheet of parchment. Scratch, 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 a sound that continues for hours on end, the sound of laws being recorded, of judgments being noted, of history being written down in the most mundane of ways. William himself sits for hours on a heavy, carved wooden chair, set upon a raised dais to elevate him above the petitioners who come before him. He is a young man still, but there is a gravity to him that makes him seem older. His face is often stern, his eyes watchful and missing nothing. He does not sit in judgment with a flourish. He sits in stillness, and he listens. One by one, the people of his duchy come before him. A farmer, his face weathered by the sun and wind, complains in a low, grumbling voice about a dispute with his neighbor over the placement of a fence. A monk from a local monastery presents a plea for funds to repair a leaky roof. A minor knight requests permission to hold a weekly market in his village, arguing about the potential tolls he could collect. The stories are small, the disputes ancient and repetitive. They are the endless, grinding friction of people living together. William listens to it all with a deep, unnerving patience. He rarely interrupts. He lets the men talk themselves out, their words echoing slightly in the vast, cool space of the hall. When he has heard enough, he will raise a hand for silence. His judgment, when it comes, is delivered in a low, decisive voice. There is no appeal. There is no debate. The matter is settled. A nearby scribe dips his quill into a pot of black iron gall ink, and in a slow, careful script records the Duke's decision. The ink sinks into the porous surface of the parchment, the words becoming law. This is the slow, unglamorous, and repetitive work of power. It is a process as rhythmic and as necessary as a farmer plowing his field, furrow by tedious furrow. But William's ambition looks beyond the daily churn of ducal administration. He understands that to secure his borders and enhance his own standing, he needs powerful allies. His gaze falls on Matilda, the daughter of the powerful Count Baldwin V of Flanders. An alliance with the Flemish would protect his southern flank and bring him immense prestige and wealth. But the path is not smooth. A message arrives from Rome. The Pope, citing the fact that William and Matilda are distant cousins, forbids the marriage. This does not lead to a passionate defiance, but to years of slow, frustrating negotiation.
Envoys traveled back and forth on the long, muddy roads between Normandy and Rome, between Normandy and Flanders. These are not dashing messengers, but sober clerical men, their mules plodding along at a walking pace. They carry letters filled with dense, carefully crafted arguments, with offers and counter-offers. The seasons turn, years pass, the matter remains unresolved. It is a courtship conducted not through love letters, but through the slow, grinding machinery of diplomacy and canon law. Finally, weary of the delays, William decides to defy the papal ban and marry Matilda. We can imagine their wedding. It is not a joyous, romantic affair. It is a grand and formal state occasion, heavy with political calculation. In the great hall, the long trestle tables are laden with food, whole roasted pigs, mountains of bread, wheels of cheese, barrels of wine. But the atmosphere is one of mutual assessment. The Norman barons and the wealthy Flemish lords watch each other from across the tables, their conversations polite but guarded. The music of pipes and viols provides a thin, cheerful veneer over the low hum of political maneuvering. William and Matilda, sitting at the high table, are the central figures in a carefully staged pageant. Their union is not the joining of two hearts, but the slow, deliberate weaving together of two powerful political houses into a single, stronger fabric. It will take William years more of patient negotiation with the Church to finally receive the Pope's blessing, an approval granted only after he agrees to build two magnificent abbeys in the city of Caen, a slow, stone-by-stone penance for his willful ambition. It is during this long period of consolidation that William's attention is drawn more and more often across the gray expanse of the sea to the kingdom of England. The English king, Edward, known as the Confessor for his piety, is a man who casts a long shadow into the future precisely because he has no children to stand in it. He is also William's first cousin, once removed. More importantly, Edward had spent much of his youth in exile in Normandy. The English court was foreign to him. The Norman court was the home of his formative years. A thread of kinship and familiarity stretches across the choppy waters of the Channel.
According to the Norman chroniclers, who wrote the history that William wanted to be remembered, a pivotal moment occurred in the year 1051. King Edward, contemplating the future of his childless kingdom, made a quiet promise. He designated William, his capable and powerful Norman cousin, as his chosen heir to the English throne. We cannot know for certain if this promise was ever truly made, but we can imagine the scene as the Normans told it. A quiet conversation in a private chamber in the palace at Westminster. The room is lit by the soft, flickering light of candles. Heavy woolen tapestries cover the stone walls, stirring slightly in the constant draft, their woven figures of saints and hunters seeming to move in the uncertain light. The elderly English king, his face thin and pale, his hands resting on the arms of his carved chair, speaks in a low, confidential voice to the Duke of Normandy. The words are momentous, but they are spoken quietly. They hang in the still, cool air between the two men, a promise that will one day be used to justify an invasion. But for now, it is just a whisper, a seed planted in the deep, fertile ground of William's ambition. For over a decade, this promise lies dormant. Life in England and Normandy continues its slow, accustomed pace. The seasons turn, each with its familiar labors and rituals. Harvests are gathered, tithes are paid, children are born, and old men die. The promise is a thing of the future, a possibility waiting for its moment. That moment draws closer in 1064, with an event that brings the quiet promise into sharp, dramatic focus. Harold Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex, the most powerful and wealthy man in England and King Edward's brother-in-law, finds himself on the coast of Normandy.
The English sources claim he was simply on a fishing trip when his ship was blown off course by a sudden, violent storm. The Norman sources insist he was sent by King Edward himself on a formal mission to swear allegiance to William and publicly confirm the Duke's status as heir to the English throne. Whatever the truth, let us picture Harold's arrival. A ship, its mast cracked and its sail torn to ribbons, is driven ashore by the gale. Harold and his retainers, soaked to the bone and exhausted, stumble onto the beach, only to be promptly taken prisoner by the local count, Guy of Ponthieu. This was a common, if opportunistic, custom of the time. Shipwrecked nobles were valuable commodities, to be held for a substantial ransom. News of this high-profile castaway travels at its usual unhurried pace to William's court. The Duke immediately sees the extraordinary opportunity that has washed ashore. He pays the ransom for Harold and has the English Earl brought to him, not as a captive, but as an honored guest. For weeks, Harold remains in Normandy, a guest who is not free to leave. He is treated with every courtesy. He hunts with William in the deep, ancient forests of the duchy, the sound of the hunting horns echoing through the trees. He feasts at the Duke's table in the evenings, the firelight flickering on the two men's faces as they share wine and bread. They ride together as William conducts a brief military campaign in neighboring Brittany. We can imagine them on horseback, side by side, the two most powerful men in their respective lands. Their conversation must be a slow, careful dance of probing questions and non-committal answers, a constant, unspoken negotiation. The culmination of this strange, enforced visit is the famous oath. William brings Harold to a place of great solemnity, perhaps the cathedral at Bayeux, or his own ducal palace at Bonneville-sur-Touques. The air inside the great stone building is cool and vast, smelling of incense and cold stone. In the center of the room, on a dais, rests a large wooden chest, a reliquary, draped with a rich cloth of gold. It is a scene of quiet, imposing gravity. William asks Harold to swear a solemn oath, to place his hands upon this chest and pledge that he will support William's claim to the English throne after King Edward's death. Imagine the silence in the hall, broken only by the low, droning voice of Harold as he recites the formal, binding words. His hands rest on the heavy, gold-threaded cloth. The assembled Norman barons watch, their faces impassive. When the last word of the oath has faded into the stillness, William gives a signal. Two attendants step forward and pull back the cloth of gold. The chest beneath is not empty. It is filled to the brim with the holiest relics that William could gather from all the churches and monasteries of his duchy. The brown, withered bones of saints, the splintered fragments of holy crosses, the dust of martyrs. The Norman chroniclers claim that a shudder of horror ran through Harold as he saw the sheer spiritual power upon which he had just unknowingly sworn his oath. He had not just made a political promise to a man, he had made a sacred, unbreakable vow to God, witnessed by a silent army of saints. Shortly after, Harold is permitted to return to England. The journey back across the Channel is smooth, the sea calm. But the gray water is no longer just a space between two lands. It is now a space filled with the heavy, invisible weight of a promise and ambition and a sacred, broken oath. Back in Normandy, William does not celebrate. He waits. He has what he needs. He returns to the slow, methodical business of governing his duchy, overseeing the construction of his great abbeys, drilling his soldiers, and strengthening his castles. The forge of ambition works slowly, its heat constant and unwavering. He watches the northern horizon over the gray sea, and he waits for the news from England that he knows must eventually come. Part 3. The Gathering Tide. The year 1065 draws to its close, and a deep, penetrating cold settles over northern Europe. The days grow short and pale, the sun a weak, watery disk in a gray sky. The nights are immensely long, a vast ocean of darkness. In the castles and cottages of England and Normandy, the rhythm of life slows to a crawl. The fields lie dormant under a blanket of frost. People stay indoors, close to their fires, their worlds shrinking to the small, flickering circle of light cast by a candle or the hearth. It is a time of waiting, of conservation, a long, quiet pause in the breath of the year. But beneath the frozen surface of the world, the seeds of a momentous conflict are waiting for the thaw.
In the first week of January 1066, within his palace at Westminster, the pious old King Edward the Confessor finally breathes his last. His final days are a hushed, solemn affair of whispered prayers, urgent counsels, and the slow fading of a life. On his deathbed, surrounded by the most powerful nobles of his kingdom, he is said to have reached out a trembling hand toward his brother-in-law, Harold Godwinson, and entrusted the care of his kingdom to him. Whatever promise may have been whispered to William in a quiet chamber years before is now forgotten or dismissed as the fancy of an old man. Whatever sacred oath Harold swore over the bones of saints in Normandy is set aside in the face of this present, pressing reality. The day after King Edward is laid to rest in the cold stone of his newly consecrated Westminster Abbey, Harold Godwinson is crowned King of England. This news does not flash across the world in an instant. It must travel at the speed of a boat and a horse. It must cross the treacherous winter sea. Imagine a small, sturdy sailing vessel, a cog fighting its way across the choppy, slate-gray waves of the English Channel. The wind is biting, the spray freezing as it hits the deck. The sailors are wrapped in heavy wool and stiff leather, their faces chapped and numb from the cold. They are not carrying mere information, they are carrying the spark that will ignite a war. After a difficult journey of several days, the boat finally makes landfall on the Norman coast. A messenger, his face etched with weariness, disembarks and makes his way inland, his horse plodding through the winter mud towards Rouen, towards the court of the Duke. The news is delivered to William not in a grand public pronouncement, but in a quiet report in his private chambers. He hears that his cousin Edward is dead. He hears that Harold, the oath-breaker, is now king. The Norman chroniclers, who were careful to record every detail of their master's righteous anger, say that upon hearing the news, William fell into a profound silence. He turned away from the messenger and walked to a window, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood there for a very long time, looking out at the bleak, frozen landscape, his shoulders rigid. The men in the room held their breath, not daring to speak. William was not a man given to hot, explosive rages. His anger was a far more formidable thing, a cold, slow-burning fire. In that long, heavy silence, a decision hardened into an unshakable resolve. Harold had perjured himself. The English throne, promised to William by right, had been stolen. He would cross the sea and take it back. But this resolution does not lead to immediate frantic action. It leads to a slow, deliberate, and monumental process of preparation. William's first move is not to sharpen swords, but to build a legal and spiritual case for his invasion. He convenes a great assembly of his most important barons. This is a long, drawn-out, and tedious affair. The barons gather in the great hall, the air thick with the smell of wet wool, wood smoke, and damp dogs sleeping by the fire. William does not give them a single fiery speech to rouse their spirits. Instead, day after day, he lays out his case, slowly and reasonably, as if he were a lawyer arguing before a court. He speaks of King Edward's promise. He details his own blood relation to the old king. And most powerfully, he speaks again and again of Harold's sacred broken oath. He frames his cause not as one of naked aggression, but as a just and righteous quest to punish a perjurer and claim his God-given inheritance.
The barons listen, their faces grim and thoughtful. They are hard, practical men. An invasion of England is an undertaking of staggering risk and expense. For days their voices drone on in the hall, debating, arguing, questioning. They discuss the number of ships needed, the cost of supplies, the dangers of the Channel crossing, the strength of the English army. William does not command their support, he earns it, slowly. He lets them voice their concerns, and then he answers them, patiently. He makes promises of land and titles in a conquered England. Slowly, painstakingly, he forges a consensus. At the same time, he sends envoys on the long, slow journey to Rome to plead his case before the Pope. They too present William's arguments, emphasizing Harold's perjury above all else. The Pope, seeing an opportunity to assert his authority over the fiercely independent English Church, is persuaded. He sends back not just his blessing, but a papal banner, a consecrated standard to be carried into battle. This single act is a masterful stroke of propaganda. It elevates William's private venture into a holy war, a crusade.
With his political and spiritual foundations carefully laid, the immense physical preparations begin. This is the true gathering of the tide, a vast coordinated effort of labor and logistics that will consume the duchy for more than 7 months. All along the Norman coast, in the estuaries of the rivers Dives and Seine, a great industry awakens. The quiet air of the countryside is soon filled with the constant, rhythmic sound of work. Let us listen to those sounds. From the deep forests comes the relentless thud, thud, thud of axes biting into the trunks of ancient oak and pine trees. Teams of woodcutters, their muscles straining, work from the pale light of dawn until the fading light of dusk. The sharp, clean scent of fresh-cut wood fills the air. Once felled, the massive logs are chained and hauled by teams of slow, powerful oxen, their hooves churning the forest floor into a sea of mud, their breath pluming in the cool air. The logs are dragged to the coastal shipyards, which are little more than cleared spaces on the shingle beaches. Here the shipwrights, masters of their craft, take over. They work not from drawings, but from a knowledge passed down through generations, a knowledge held in their eyes and in their hands. The sounds of the shipyard form a constant, monotonous symphony of creation. The long 2-man pit saws rasping back and forth, cutting the logs into rough planks. The thump-thump of wooden mallets striking chisels to shape the curved ribs of the hulls. And above all, the relentless echoing clang, clang, clang of hundreds of hammers driving thousands upon thousands of iron nails, fastening the overlapping planks of the clinker-built ships. The smell of the shipyards is a pungent mix of salt air, cut wood, and hot, bubbling tar. Over smoky fires, men tend great iron cauldrons filled with black, sticky pitch. Other men use long-handled mops to slather this thick, acrid substance into every seam and joint of the new hulls. A slow, messy, repetitive task to make the vessels watertight. Day after day, week after week, under the slowly warming sun of spring and summer, the skeletal shapes of ships emerge from the piles of lumber. While the fleet is being built, 1,000 other preparations continue at that same relentless, unhurried pace. In every town and village, the blacksmith's forge glows day and night. The hiss of hot metal plunged into water, and the rhythmic ring of hammer on anvil are the heartbeat of the war effort. Swords are forged, spearheads are hammered into shape, and arrowheads are produced by the tens of thousands. The most painstaking work is the making of chainmail, the slow, tedious process of drawing iron into wire, coiling the wire, cutting it into tiny rings, and then linking thousands of them together, one by one, into a protective shirt.
An army is gathered, not just William's Norman vassals, but thousands of mercenaries, knights, and adventurers from Brittany, Flanders, and all across France. Men drawn by the promise of good pay and the even greater lure of English land. They begin to assemble near the mouth of the Dives River, and a vast city of tents and lean-tos springs up along the coast. The logistical challenge of feeding and supplying this great host is immense. Day after day, heavy two-wheeled carts, pulled by slow-moving oxen, trundle along the rutted roads, laden with sacks of grain, barrels of wine and ale, and wheels. By August, all is ready. The fleet, numbering perhaps 700 all is ready. The anchor in the estuary, their new sails furled, their masts a dense forest against the summer sky. The army is assembled, its soldiers and its thousands of war horses restless. The great tide has gathered, and then it waits. For a full month, the invasion is held in check by an invisible, insurmountable force, the wind. It blows steadily, relentlessly, directly against them. It is impossible to sail. The days of waiting stretch into a week, then 2, then a month. The vast, costly enterprise is paralyzed. The mood in the sprawling camp sours. The food supplies begin to dwindle. The men grow bored, then restless, then mutinous. William must ride among them constantly, his presence a force of unwavering, patient authority, holding his fragile coalition together through sheer force of will. Every morning, he and his commanders look to the weather vanes and the flags on the ship's masts. Every morning, they point south, back towards the land. The wind does not change. During this long, frustrating pause, a silent, awe-inspiring visitor appears in the night sky. A great comet, what would one day be known as Halley's Comet, hangs in the darkness, its long, shimmering tail a brushstroke of pale light against the stars. To the superstitious men of the 11th century, it is a powerful and deeply unsettling omen. In England, it is seen as a sign of doom. In William's camp, his priests and propagandists work to interpret it as a sign from God, a promise of the great change to come. Finally, at the end of September, after being forced to move his fleet further up the coast, the moment comes. The wind slackens, it shifts, and then it begins to blow steadily and firmly from the south. The tide can now be released. The order is given to embark. The process is a scene of immense, controlled chaos, continuing long after sunset. Thousands of men, thousands of terrified horses, and tons of equipment are loaded onto the creaking, bobbing ships in the torchlight. As darkness falls completely on the 27th of September, the great fleet puts to sea. The only sounds are the rhythmic dip and splash of thousands of oars, the groan of timbers, and the whisper of the long-awaited wind in the sails. The Norman coast with its flickering campfires fades into a thin, dark line behind them. Ahead lies only darkness, the black water, and the shore of England. Part 4. The Shore and the Hill. The night on the English Channel is a vast, black, and disorienting void. For the thousands of soldiers packed onto the open decks of William's fleet, there is little to see but the faint, bobbing glow of the lantern on the mast of the flagship, the Mora, and the endless, shifting dark water below. Above, the sky is a cold, remote canopy of stars. The sounds are monotonous and hypnotic. The rhythmic, weary groan of the wooden hulls as they flex with the waves, the constant creak of the masts and rigging, the gentle, repetitive slap of water against the planks, and the low, murmuring hum of men's voices, speaking in hushed tones of nervous anticipation. In the cramped, stuffy holds below deck, the horses shift and stamp their hooves, a dull, percussive, and unsettling rhythm that travels up through the floorboards.
The crossing is not swift. The ships are heavy, laden with men, horses, and supplies. They move with a deliberate, plodding pace, powered by the single large sail and the slow, exhausting work of the oarsmen. For many of the men, landlocked soldiers who may never have been on a boat before, the constant, gentle, sickening roll of the sea is a profound misery. The air is cold and damp, a chilling mist that clings to their woolen cloaks and makes sleep all but impossible. There is no comfort here, no shelter from the elements. They can only sit, huddled together for warmth, or lean against the ship's railing, staring out into the impenetrable darkness, waiting as the long hours of the night pass with agonizing slowness. The night is a long, cold, and anxious vigil. As the absolute black of the night sky begins to soften into the first pale, bruised gray of pre-dawn, a low, dark line emerges on the horizon. At first it is just a smudge, an indistinct boundary between the gray sea and the gray sky. But as the ships draw ever closer, the line resolves itself into the low cliffs and wide, sweeping beaches of the English coast. They are making for Pevensey Bay, a broad, sheltered inlet, its shoreline marked by the crumbling stone walls of an ancient, abandoned Roman fort. There is no resistance. The English army is not there. The great landing is entirely unopposed. King Harold and his forces, as William had perhaps calculated, are hundreds of miles to the north. Only days before, they had fought and won a brutal, exhausting battle against an invading Norwegian army at a place called Stamford Bridge. The south coast of England, for this brief, critical moment, is utterly undefended. The process of disembarkation is as slow and methodical as every other aspect of William's campaign. The shallow draft ships are run directly onto the wide, pebbled beach. Long wooden ramps are lowered with a thud onto the wet shingle. The men, stiff and weary from the crossing, begin to file off, their feet sinking into the unfamiliar ground. The air is still and cool, the silence broken only by the mournful cries of gulls and the gentle, rhythmic hiss of the waves washing up and then receding from the shore. The most difficult and time-consuming task is unloading the cavalry horses. The animals, terrified by the journey and the strange surroundings, must be carefully coaxed and sometimes physically forced down the steep, unstable ramps, their eyes wide with panic, their hooves clattering on the wood before finding purchase on the soft ground. According to the stories told later, as William himself steps from his ship onto the soil of England, his foot slips on the wet stones and he stumbles, falling forward into the mud on the beach. A collective, horrified gasp runs through the knights and soldiers standing nearby. In an age where every event is a potential sign from God, such a fall is a disastrous omen, a clear portent of failure. But William, with quick presence of mind, pushes himself up. He opens his hands, showing them to be full of the wet sand and mud of the beach. "See, my lords," his voice rings out, clear and steady. "By the splendor of God, I have taken England with both my hands." In an instant, he transforms a moment of potential catastrophe into a prophecy of triumph. But even this dramatic moment is a small event, quickly absorbed by the immense quiet emptiness of the bay. The Norman army does not immediately charge inland to seek glory. They are far too patient for that. They establish a secure base. They use the ancient Roman walls of Pevensey as a ready-made fortification. A steady, monotonous procession of men carries supplies from the ships to the shore. Carts are unloaded, barrels and sacks are stacked, tents are pitched. Sentries are posted on the crumbling walls, their figures small against the vast gray sky. In a remarkable feat of planning, a prefabricated wooden castle, brought in numbered sections from Normandy, is unloaded and assembled, the familiar sound of carpenters' hammers once again echoing in the still air.
For days the Normans stay close to the coast, consolidating their position, sending small, cautious scouting parties out to probe the surrounding countryside. It is another period of quiet, deliberate waiting. William's strategy now is one of patient provocation. He wants to force Harold to come to him, to fight on ground of William's choosing. He sends his raiding parties out into the surrounding countryside of Sussex. These lands, as William well knows, are the personal estates of Harold's own family. The raids are not meant to conquer territory, but to inflict a deep, personal, and public wound. The process is slow and systematic. Villages are put to the torch, livestock is driven off, the autumn crops waiting for harvest are trampled into the mud. From a distance, one would see only a series of thin, dark plumes of smoke rising into the pale autumn sky, day after day, marking the slow, deliberate, and destructive path of the Norman army. Hundreds of miles to the north, Harold receives the devastating news that William has landed. His army, already battered and bone-weary from the battle at Stamford Bridge and the long march north that preceded it, is now forced to turn around and begin an incredible forced march south. Imagine the sheer mind-numbing toil of that journey. For more than a week they march, covering nearly 250 miles. The only sound is the endless rhythmic tramp of thousands of tired feet on the old straight Roman roads. The constant creak of leather belts and shield straps, the jingle of mail and weapons. Each day is an identical trial of endurance. Rise before dawn in the cold, march all day with only the briefest of halts, make a rough camp as dusk falls, and try to sleep on the hard ground before starting the same ordeal the next morning. Harold and his exhausted army finally arrive back in London. He spends only a few days there, gathering what fresh troops he can. His advisors plead with him to wait, to gather a larger force, to let William's army come to him. But Harold is a proud man, and the news of the deliberate, insulting destruction of his own family lands has enraged him. He will not wait. He decides to march out at once and destroy the invaders. On October 13th, his army arrives and takes up a strong defensive position on top of a low ridge known as Senlac Hill, about 6 miles north of William's camp near Hastings. The ground slopes steeply away from their position, a natural defense against the Normans' most powerful weapon, the cavalry charge. The two armies are now in place. As night falls, a tense, expectant quiet settles over the landscape. The dawn of Saturday, October 14th, 1066, breaks gray and chilly. A low mist drapes the valleys, obscuring the view. The Saxons form their great shield wall along the crest of the ridge. It is their traditional and most effective tactic. A line of men standing shoulder to shoulder, their large kite-shaped shields overlapping, their long spears pointing outwards. From a distance, it appears as a solid, impenetrable barrier of wood, leather, and iron. The battle begins around 9 in the morning. It does not begin with a dramatic, thundering charge, but with a slow, grinding, and repetitive process. First, the Norman archers walk slowly to the base of the hill and begin to fire their arrows upwards. The sound is a great collective whoosh, like a vast flock of birds taking flight, followed moments later by a dull, percussive thudding as the arrows rain down upon the tightly locked Saxon shields. For the most part, they are ineffective. Next come the Norman infantry, the foot soldiers, who begin the long, arduous slog up the steep slope. They are met at the top by the unyielding wall of shields and spears. The real sounds of battle begin, the harsh, jarring crash of steel on wood, the guttural shouts of men exerting all their strength, the sharp cries of the wounded. The Norman infantry cannot break through. They falter and then fall back in disorder down the hill. Then William commits his knights. A thunderous pounding of hooves echoes across the field as the armored cavalry charges up the slope. But the hill is too steep, the shield wall too solid. The charge loses its momentum. The horses shy away from the wall of spears. The knights are thrown back, another wave of steel breaking against the Saxon rock. For hours, this same brutal and monotonous rhythm repeats itself. The Normans attack up the hill. The Saxon shield wall holds. The Normans retreat back down the hill to regroup. The sun climbs slowly to its zenith and begins its long, slow descent toward the western horizon. The ground at the foot of the hill becomes a terrible, muddy landscape of the dead and dying. The shield wall, though battered and depleted, remains unbroken. As the long afternoon wears on, William, seeing that his direct assaults are failing, resorts to a patient and cunning stratagem. He orders a contingent of his knights to charge the line, engage briefly, and then turn and feign a panicked retreat. It is a desperately risky maneuver. Some of the Saxons on the flanks, weary after standing in formation for more than 6 hours and perhaps overconfident in their success, fall for the ruse. They break their disciplined formation and, with triumphant shouts, charge down the hill in pursuit of the supposedly fleeing Normans. This is the moment William has been waiting for. On the flat ground at the bottom of the hill, the fleeing knights suddenly wheel their horses around, turning on their pursuers. The disorganized Saxons, now exposed and without the protection of their wall, are cut down. The tactic is repeated, slowly and deliberately. Each time, a few more Saxons are lured from the safety of their high ground. Each time, the great shield wall becomes a little weaker, a little thinner. As dusk begins to settle, the light fading from the sky, William orders one final, massive combined assault. He orders his archers to aim high, to let their arrows arc over the top of the shield wall and fall down upon the unprotected men behind it. At the same time, his exhausted infantry and cavalry begin one last desperate push up the hill. The rain of arrows causes confusion and carnage among the Saxon ranks, and in the chaotic, swirling melee of this final attack, as the day dies, King Harold is struck down. The Bayeux tapestry depicts him with an arrow piercing his eye, though it is just as likely he was cut down by the swords of Norman knights who finally broke through the wavering line. With their king dead and their formation shattered, the last remnants of Saxon resistance finally crumble and break. The battle ends not with a great triumphant cheer, but with a ragged, weary pursuit in the gathering darkness. The fight has lasted for more than 9 hours, a long, slow, grinding affair of attrition. As night falls, a profound, exhausted silence descends upon Senlac Hill, a silence broken only by the groans of the wounded and the whisper of the wind through the trampled, blood-soaked grass. William, the victor, sits on his horse amidst the terrible stillness. He is no longer a hopeful invader on the shore. He is the master of the hill. The long day is over.
Part 5. The Crown and the Dust. The morning of October 15th dawns cold and damp, the sky a uniform, melancholy gray. A thick, wet mist clings to the ground, shrouding the battlefield of the previous day in a ghostly white silence. As the sun rises, its weak light struggles to penetrate the fog, slowly revealing a scene of profound and sorrowful stillness. The great violent energy of the battle has vanished, and what remains is the grim, silent, and motionless aftermath. The bodies of thousands of men and horses lie scattered upon the trampled grass of Senlac Hill, their armor and clothing dark with dew and blood. High overhead, crows circle in the mist, their black shapes appearing and disappearing, their harsh, lonely calls the only sound that breaks the deep, unnatural quiet.
In the Norman camp, the mood is not one of jubilant celebration. It is one of sheer, bone-deep exhaustion and somber relief. The slow, heavy work of clearing the field begins. Soldiers, their faces etched with weariness, move slowly across the hill, their feet treading carefully among the fallen. They search for their friends and kinsmen, gently turning bodies over, whispering names into the quiet air. The wounded are carried away on makeshift stretchers, their low groans a constant sorrowful undertone. The dead, friend and foe alike, are gathered and buried in great, anonymous pits dug into the Sussex soil. It is a slow, grim, and methodical accounting of the cost of victory. William orders that the body of his great rival, King Harold, be found among the heaps of the slain. According to the legend that will be told for centuries, the king's face was so terribly mutilated in the final struggle that he could not be recognized by his own men. It is only his wife, Edith Swanwick, who can identify him by certain marks upon his body known only to her. In a final ambiguous gesture, William has Harold's body buried not in a consecrated churchyard, but on a windswept cliff-top overlooking the sea, as if to make him the eternal guardian of the coast he had failed to defend. The battle is over. The long, bloody day has ended. And now its story begins the slow, inexorable transition from the raw experience of warriors into the polished narrative of history and legend. But the conquest of England is far from complete. Winning a single decisive battle is one thing. Winning the submission of an entire kingdom is another. William does not make the mistake of immediately marching on the great prize, the City of London. His movements, as always, remain cautious, patient, and deliberate. He first returns his army to their coastal base at Hastings, allowing his men time to rest, to tend their wounds, and to regroup. Then he begins a long, slow, and circuitous march, not directly towards London, but around it. His army moves through the southeastern counties of Kent, Surrey, and Hampshire. This is not a triumphant victory parade. It is a calculated, terrifying demonstration of power. The Norman army is a slow-moving, inexorable force, and wherever it goes, it leaves a trail of fear and submission. William's goal is to methodically isolate London, to cut it off from any potential support, to make its eventual surrender an unavoidable necessity rather than a negotiated choice. The remaining English lords, who had not been at Hastings, watched the slow, remorseless advance of this foreign army and must make a decision. One by one, the key towns and strategic centers, Dover, with its great cliff-top fortress, Canterbury, the spiritual heart of the kingdom, Winchester, the ancient royal capital, surrender to him without a fight. These submissions are not dramatic events. They are quiet, formal, and humiliating ceremonies. A delegation of gray-faced town elders and priests rides out to meet the Duke. They offer him the keys to their city. They kneel in the mud of the road and swear their allegiance. There are no cheers, only the low murmur of voices reciting oaths and the heavy, resentful silence of a defeated people. Finally, the great sprawling city of London stands alone, effectively surrounded. The remaining English leaders, including the young, uncrowned Saxon heir Edgar Atheling, realize that any further resistance would be a futile and bloody gesture. A delegation, including the most powerful bishops and nobles, rides out from the city to meet William at the town of Berkhamsted. There, in another quiet, formal ceremony, they offer him the crown of England. The conquest, which had begun with the rhythmic clang of hammers on the Norman coast, ends not with a bang, but with the quiet, weary whisper of submission.
On Christmas Day, 1966, less than 3 months after the battle, William is crowned king. in the cold, cavernous space of Westminster Abbey, the very church King Edward had built, and where both he and Harold now lay buried. The ceremony is a tense, uneasy fusion of two cultures, two languages, two peoples, now bound together by force. The great stone church is filled with a nervous, segregated congregation of richly dressed Norman knights and grim-faced Anglo-Saxon nobles. According to the ancient rite, the Archbishop of York, an Englishman, asks the assembled English in their own guttural tongue if they accept William as their king. A roar of assent echoes through the abbey. Then the Bishop of Coutances, a Norman, asks the same question of the Normans in French. They too roar their approval. But the Norman guards stationed outside the abbey, hearing the sudden loud shouting from within and not understanding the English words, mistake it for an uprising, a treacherous assault on their duke. In a panic, they set fire to the surrounding English houses. Smoke begins to billow into the abbey, and the terrified congregation, Saxon and Norman alike, stampedes for the exits. Inside the half-empty, smoke-filled church, a visibly trembling William is hastily anointed with holy oil and crowned King of England by the Archbishop. His new reign begins not with majesty and splendor, but with fear, confusion, and the acrid smell of smoke. The years that follow are a long, slow, and often brutal consolidation of this newly won power. Rebellions flare up, particularly in the wild and fiercely independent north of England. William puts them down with a methodical and terrifying ruthlessness. His harrying of the north in 1069 is not a series of battles, but a systematic, dispassionate campaign of devastation. He orders his armies to burn villages, destroy crops, and kill livestock, deliberately creating a famine that leaves an entire region barren and depopulated for a generation. It is a slow, cold, and calculated act of state terror, designed to extinguish the last embers of English resistance. To control his new kingdom, William introduces the Norman system of castles. All across the English landscape, these stark alien symbols of the new order begin to rise. At first, they are simple, hastily built structures of earth and timber, a high, steep-sided mound of earth called a motte, with a wooden tower on top, adjacent to a larger, fenced-in courtyard called a bailey. But over the long, slow years, these are rebuilt in stone. The sound of construction becomes a familiar drone in the land for decades. The slow quarrying of stone, the rhythmic chipping of the masons, the creak of wooden cranes hoisting massive blocks into place. These castles, the Tower of London, Windsor, Dover, are not built as comfortable homes, but as permanent military garrisons, their stern, unadorned stone walls a constant, silent reminder to the English people of who was now master. In 1085, near the end of his long and arduous reign, William orders his most lasting and monumental administrative act, a great survey of his entire kingdom. This project becomes known to the English as the Doomsday Book, for it was said that its judgments were as final as those of the last day. For months, teams of royal commissioners travel to every corner of England, to every shire, every village. They hold public inquiries, summoning a jury of local men and putting to them the same long, monotonous list of questions. Who holds this land now? Who held it in the time of King Edward? How much land is there? How many plows? How many mills and fish ponds? How many freemen? How many villagers? How many slaves? How many pigs, sheep, and cattle? A scribe sitting at a portable desk records all the answers with his scratching quill, filling page after page with dense, abbreviated Latin. It is a mind-numbing, monumental exercise in counting and recording.
The result is not a story, but an exhaustive, dispassionate inventory of a kingdom, its purpose purely practical, so that the king might know exactly what his new country contained and how much tax it could be made to yield. As William grows older, the lean, hungry duke becomes a stout, heavy-set king, his face stern and careworn. The raw wounds of the conquest begin to slowly, painfully scar over. The French-speaking Norman lords and the Anglo-Saxon English population begin the long, slow, and often difficult process of mingling. They live side by side, in a state of uneasy coexistence that gradually, over generations, softens into a new kind of society. They intermarry. Their languages, the language of the ruler and the language of the ruled, begin to bleed into one another, creating the rich, hybrid tapestry of Middle English. William, the Conqueror, dies in 1087, not in a great battle, but from an internal injury sustained when his horse stumbled during a minor siege in France. His end is unglamorous. The great king, who had gambled everything on a single battle and remade a nation in his own image, is gone. And now the dust of centuries begins to fall. It falls slowly, quietly, inexorably. The names of the great men fade. The stone castles crumble, their sharp edges softened by wind and rain. The ink on the pages of the Doomsday Book fades. The memory of the man himself transforms. The hated foreign tyrant slowly becomes a foundational figure, a name in a book, a story told to children. William the Bastard becomes William the Conqueror, his name a solid, immovable stone in the great complex structure of history. But the real story is not in the names of kings or the dates of battles. It is in the slow, silent continuities. The fields around the site of the battle are still plowed, season after season. The tides still ebb and flow in Pevensey Bay. The wind still whispers through the long grass on the quiet hill. The slow, patient rhythm of life, so violently interrupted, eventually resumes its ancient, unending pace. And as you lie here now, on the very edge of sleep, you can let the grand narrative of conquest and crowns dissolve into these quieter, more enduring things. The story of William is not just the story of a battle. It is the story of a slow, gathering tide, of a long and patient wait, of the relentless, grinding force of a single will. It is a story that, in the end, sinks back into the earth from which it came, becoming part of the soil, part of the landscape, part of the deep, quiet memory of the world. Let the details fade. Let the clash of arms be replaced by the sigh of the wind. Let the shouts of kings be replaced by the whisper of time. The long, long day is done, and now you can sleep.